Hi, everybody. I'm Colleen Johnson, the CEO of ProKanban, and welcome to our next episode of Kanban for Everyone. Today, we're going to be talking about Kanban in the world of crypto, which is an exciting topic and one I'm really interested to dig into here today. We are joined by Joshua Foreman today. Welcome, Josh.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for
Awesome.
having me.
Yeah, we're really excited you're here with us today. I had the pleasure of working with Josh. Wow, it's been some years behind us now, but came to teach some Kanban classes at a crypto exchange that you were working with. But you have been in this space for quite some time. Will you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, sure. If I go back to the very beginning for just a short time, I like to say that my engineering career started when I was 10 as a curious kid when my dad bought an Apple II Plus, and I dug into the little spiral bound notebook for the basic programming language and had a lot of fun and helped solve math problems and all that kind of cool stuff. So fast forward, up through college, and I started my professional engineering career in the late 90s. And I'm sorry, boy, I'm aging. I'm the early 90s, actually. So I got my first job as a programmer, we were called back then. And then it was around that 2000 timeframe that my curiosity about how people worked and how processes and systems work started to become greater than my curiosity about the next technology, the next language, whatever was coming up on the technical side. So much so that I went back to graduate school and got my master's in organizational leadership, and that was in 2007. And a little bit before then and through then, I've been managing engineering teams since then. For the most part, I've had a couple stints of going back, getting my hands on and writing code again, but mostly managing teams and helping develop the processes, mentoring people, and doing all that stuff that I really enjoy doing. That is really relevant for our conversation here. And let's see. So then how did crypto come into my scene? Well, in 2015, 16-ish, I was working for a company and our customers were banks. And so I was following all the financial trends, and Bitcoin kept showing up in whatever Twitter and different news feeds. And I kept swiping it away and swiping it away. And so ultimately, as it showed up too much, I'm like, okay, let me check this out some. And I got super curious and fascinated with blockchain technology. The whole crypto ethos at that point was not as strong to me as the actual how blockchain technology works. And the decentralized trust model I thought was super fascinating. And so then I decided, you know what? It just kept growing and growing. And I said, what am I doing working anywhere but in crypto? And wound up getting a job at the company that you mentioned, Colleen. That company was called Shapeshift. I started my professional crypto career in 2017. And actually, that's one of the times when I went back to be a hands-on developer, because I was so fascinated with the technology. I wanted to dig in at the code level. And then because of my experience, actually quickly was promoted up into leadership roles, and basically went through the whole bull market and then through the bear market and then went through the bull market. And we recently transitioned from a company into a DAO, into a decentralized autonomous organization. That could be a whole topic there.
Yeah.
And but that transition from a company to a DAO is when I decided I'd been running engineering for many years at Shapeshift, and I decided that it was time for me to branch off and do my own thing, which was to do coaching. And I have been focusing for the past year on leadership coaching for engineers. So currently I coach, I have about 12 clients, CTOs, principal engineer, director of engineering. About half of them are in crypto and half are in other organizations of various sizes. So working with them on their people, process, technology, right, and how they are managing their teams and doing what they're doing on the engineering side. So I've helped multiple people, including myself, implement Kanban and different engineering processes, and really excited to talk about Kanban and crypto some more with you here in the next little bit, Colleen.
Awesome. Yeah, you said so much there, Josh. Like, give me more questions I want to ask you and drill into here. And I think a great place to start would just be, what are some of, you've got a very unique experience, right, of all this engineering background, and then also coaching inside the crypto space and outside of that industry. So I'm sure there's a lot of juxtaposition you can present here on, maybe all engineering problems are engineering problems, and then maybe there's some that are very unique to crypto. So let's start there. Tell us a little bit about what are the common things you see when working inside of crypto companies, and especially with engineering teams that are focusing on blockchain development.
Yeah, well, I think similar, I will probably say this a lot, similar to other like startups. And not all my clients are in startups, but probably most of them, some kind of technology startup, is new technology, right? You're dealing with new technology, but the thing that's really interesting about crypto, the kind of how it compounds, is not only are you as an engineer or an engineering leader in a crypto company creating your own new technology, blockchain technology is still fairly new, and we're figuring out all kinds of new stuff to do with it. Pretty much, every year, month, day, however you look at timeframes. So that ability to adapt quickly with building new stuff on top of new stuff, and then users using things in different ways, finding new ways to use the tools that you're creating creates a pretty fun, I think, challenge. And then you have the challenges also of, as you're building this, building the culture around it, building the teams, right? Making sure that people are empowered, but also all rowing in the same direction, right? That's a real big challenge in crypto, because there's so many ideas out there of what can be done. And you want people do their best work when they're empowered and they have autonomy, but you still need to keep everybody focused on the same goal and working together.
Yeah, no, and that makes a ton of sense, right? When we start thinking about visualization, right, and creating some transparency around the work and how it all comes together at different levels of the organization, we tend to think a lot about Kanban at the team level, and it's definitely where my head went when you were talking about engineering teams working like this. But as you start to think about scaling inside of an organization where you have teams of teams working together on one product in particular, that coordination effort becomes really important, and the visibility into it becomes really important.
Yeah.
We tend to talk a lot about kind of our three pillars from a Kanban perspective. Is it effective? Do we give the customers what they want when they want it? Is it efficient, right? Are we building our best products with the resources we have available? And is it predictable? Can we deliver when we say we're going to deliver? And when you think about those three elements, does one feel more important in this segment or in this sector than others, maybe, or does it shift?
Well, it shifts, but I would say probably the biggest theme is that predictability. And even with my clients today, right? In fact, just talking to the engineering workstream leader of a DAO last week, and that predictability factor of when are we going to have this done, and then the other thing that's interesting when you talk about predictability is that there are external deadlines set, or for some reason you need something by a certain date. All right, well, we're not going to be able to get everything we want by that date. So what can we do to deliver a suitable amount by that date?
Yeah, it's funny. We think about dates sometimes as being something that's important in highly regulated industries, but I guess there's other elements here of hitting dates for different releases or a new token launch or something like that are going to be just as critical, but maybe not the same type of date pressure you might have in finance for something more regulated through banks, right?
Sure. Yeah. Right. I mean, and if you're in crypto, regulation's coming, right? There is some of it there, and the whole recent debacle with FTX and SBF, more is coming. That seems inevitable. So there will be more of that. But even without that, right? Crypto has conferences. Conferences are really big in the world of crypto, and you want to be announcing and showing off new cool stuff at conferences. So you have those kind of dates going on too.
So let's talk about the customer side of things here. So, when you think about that effectiveness, are we giving the people what they want when they want it type of thing? Sometimes we see a lot of bloat in organizations where the bigger we get, the further we get away from the end user and from the customer. And from the crypto side, a lot of this is the people doing the work tend to be really close to the product and to the customers, right? At least from my experience in the space and the people I know, it's almost like a passion project for a lot of the engineers you're working with. Do you feel like there's an important connection there to the?
I think so. Like when I first started at Shapeshift, the culture there was amazing. I mean, it was ad hoc, Cowboys Gone Wild kind of stuff. And so that maybe wasn't so great, but the passion for people and it's still true today, even though maybe not quite as much, but it is still definitely true today. And what I would tell people, as I was like first there and people, well, what's it like? I said, I just realized this is the first place I've been where every single person who works in the company is literally bought into the mission of the company. Yeah. It's not just like, I'm working for some, hotel booking site. And, oh yeah, I think, people being able to book their hotels seamlessly is really important. Right. I mean, it can be, and that's awesome if that's your passion, but to get 100 people, all together who share that same passion. Whereas in crypto, people actually, bought crypto, they own it. It's part of, what they're doing. And there was nobody who worked there that did not own crypto, basically. Like that just didn't happen.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned it was like the Wild Wild West, a lot of cowboy, no process. And when you first started there, what were some of the things that led that organization in particular to try to figure out some kind of process or say, okay, like this isn't working for us. We need to try to identify a better way of delivering.
So, what happened was, so while Shapeshift did kind of your typical kind of startup journey, started building a tool, it ultimately like caught on, but there were just, I don't know, one or two people building it. Right. So it's just the need for process is not quite as strong. And as that, we hired people and started making money, built more, determined some other wouldn't it be fun to build this? Wouldn't it be fun to build this? Because we were making so much money, like, okay, hire some people for that, hire some people for that. And we just grew like without any real structure in which to put people in. Just, okay, new product team, which was a product person and a bunch of engineers, go build that. The different teams did not talk to each other, right? We were working in the same office. At this point, I wasn't yet running all of engineering, but I was leading one of the engineering teams building our core exchange product. I had no idea what some of the other teams were doing, just zero clue. It was hard enough for me to just keep the thing that I had going and running, right? So then what happened is the crypto bear market started, right? Customers stopped using the exchange so much. We talked about regulation a little earlier. Shapeshift made the decision to implement a massive regulation change, which was KYC, right? You had to like upload your driver's license in order to use the tool, and customers flocked from our product, like away from the product at that point. So we basically were in this, all right, we're now no longer making money. We've got to figure out what we're doing. What are we building? We had, I don't know, half a dozen different disparate teams doing their own things. And that's when like bringing things together, you mentioned transparency and visibility earlier, to be able to create that and people work together. That's you came in a couple months after that, right?
Yeah. And I think I remember, I think our initial pass through the training session was really more of a generic, like, let's talk about Agile. I think there was a request to lean more towards Scrum from some of the leadership at the time. And we walked through, I said, let's talk about both so you understand what you're picking and the, the pros and cons of each approach and practice. And we walked through some Scrum and some Kanban. And then I got a call a couple days later and everybody said, come teach us more about Kanban, which was great. But there was something there for the teams, I think, and for the engineers doing the work that got them really excited about the Kanban approach. And it was awesome to go back and do all those classes with the teams because they were so excited, that there was something that was going to help them, right? Help them organize, help them make this visible. So it definitely got traction with the engineers pretty quickly. So what was it like on the inside? I got to come and dump all this class and walk away. You tell me what was happening behind the scenes.
Here's all this. So we struggled in the beginning, but luckily we had at the time we were using Jira, or it lasted there a little bit, currently not in use, but we had that. Anyway, we had Jira at the time, and we had some people who knew how to administer Jira, create boards. And we created a system. We still had separate, we called them, instead of teams, we called them squads, right? And all the squads were working on the same product together, but different feature sets, epics, were designated for the different squads. So each squad had their own board. We allowed a little bit of autonomy there. But and so, we really started to use it. And I think it had a typical little bit of a rocky start in the beginning. Okay, we need tickets. You got to move tickets across the board, right? Like being able to really track things. But with the kind of the aha moment happened when, after we were using it for a while and we had built some data, now we talked about predictability earlier. Now we were able to estimate some delivery dates. And what people really, really liked about Kanban is to estimate the dates. We called it, let's go do the Jira math, right? We would, we define an epic, we break it out into tickets, and then we would look at historical data. And I think this is exactly what you told us to do, Colleen. We would look at historical data, look at cycle time. How long does it take a ticket to move across, one person to move one ticket across the board on average? And then, you do some math to figure out, okay, well, now we've got 20 tickets. We've got 4 engineers. Here's our estimated delivery date. And then we would do a little bit of a gut check, right? It wasn't just like, go throw that date to the business, but once we got to that point, everyone was totally on board. And that just became the way that we did work. And we had multiple squads all working together, finishing epics at different times in different stages. And it really got really nice, really nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And it's always surprising too, I think, when you with any kind of process change or new process, in this case, not even really a change, but the introduction of new structure for these teams, I think there's always a little bit of why do I have to change the way I was working? I was getting stuff out the door before. Why are you making me change things and write a ticket for everything and do these team sync ups every day? But then when you start to see I don't have to story point anymore, or our dates are getting more accurate, or products off my back because we're tracking to an actual realistic date. That's, I think, always where we see a lot of engineering teams go, oh, okay, no, now I'm in. This is easier for me. Talk to me about work in progress limits. Was that something that the teams adopted? Did they adopt? Was that a willing adoption? Did it take some traction to get the teams to limit that?
That's a good question. The work in progress stuff was really, there was no one up on high, with a whip, trying to control work in progress. It was really for the teams, what they would notice, right? When tickets would stack up in one stage or one column of the Kanban board. It was almost more like, you could just feel it in the workflow. You hardly even needed to look at the board to know that we were up against a whip limit. So we didn't have hard-coded whip limits that set off alerts or dates, but it was just something that the teams monitored pretty much on a daily, weekly basis.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and I mean, it is for the teams, right? I think that's
Yeah.
what often happens is if it's set or mandated, like you said, from leadership or from some other part of the business, there's no buy-in to it, and it's just constantly ignored. So it's cool the teams took the ownership and had a system to manage it themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
How about from the product side? So you had mentioned that product was pretty just disjointed in terms of everybody kind of working on their own thing and not really having visibility into how those things came together. Were there, did you scale your Kanban up at a programmer portfolio level for the product folks, or were they, did it help them in any way?
Yeah, it's funny because I was actually just about to mention the importance of the engineering product partnership, and because everything that happened at Shapeshift when we brought in Kanban was a partnership between engineering and product. They were intimately involved with the whole project. I mentioned that we had some people who really knew how to set up Jira for us. They were actually on the product team, not on the engineering team. But they were also very willing and really helped define how we did work. And then that led to how we look at roadmap or feature planning, right? When we would get stakeholders together and talk about the different upcoming features, and the product team really drove that. And us on the engineering side were very happy to have them drive it because they were very inclusive in how they did it. And, there was also, I also noticed that when engineering and product leadership, the better we got along, the better the teams got along as well. So and it was a little rockier in the beginning. And, as we went through, there were some shifts in personnel and stuff like that, but it definitely got to a point where it really solidified. And when our processes were working really well with Kanban, it also had, there were probably multiple factors, but the culture, we got a lot less blamey, even though, frankly, our product wasn't performing any better in the market, right? Just internally, we collaborated a lot better together. And I think that having this smooth Kanban process and easy rails for people to collaborate, the structure for people to collaborate within, was a huge help for that.
Yeah, you said something there too, and you said this at the beginning, talking a little bit about what's going on with FTX right now, right? They've been in the news for the last week or two, pretty consistently, even just normal local news. I think I've seen them on. So they are everywhere right now, and I think thinking about when you think about some of the stuff that a lot of organizations struggle with, even outside of crypto, right? It's that ability to respond quickly when you have to, right? A lot of stuff is changing. They may be too late for them, but for other organizations, thinking about how quickly can you pivot in a space where that is a requirement, right, of the industry that you're in. Things are going to change quickly. You have to respond very quickly. And I see a lot of companies struggle with that because they've got, you use the magic words here, a product roadmap, right? We already picked what we're going to do for the whole year, and we're set in stone, and we're working against this roadmap. How does that factor in with the companies, either with Shapeshift or companies that you're coaching now? How do you help them build a flexible plan so they can be more responsive?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what I've seen, I think it's a good idea to have an idea of where you want to go in the next year to 3 years. I also think that when you start then putting the pieces in motion, you need to think about that adaptability piece so that you can pivot if needed. I don't think I've ever been anywhere where, okay, it's January, if that's your planning cycle. Okay, this is what we're going to build in 2023. And that's what you build in 2023, by the end of 2023. Look at that. We built exactly what we thought we were going to build a year ago.
But it makes us feel better. The plan makes us feel better.
Well, and what's the that old saying, right? The reason why you make a plan is so that you can change it. I think it actually helps you adapt to change if you can have a loosely held plan. And that's what Kanban allows for, is a loosely held plan where you've got data, you can plan features and releases, And when you need to switch, you don't have to now all of a sudden change all the dependencies on a Gantt chart, right? And figure out what that does. You're just able to finish whatever work is currently in cycle and change at the next cycle start time, rather than, oh, we didn't even think about that, or we planned that for a couple cycles later. Just, you can put it in the next one pretty easily. And we definitely took advantage of that at Shapeshift, and with the clients I have now that have gotten far enough in the process. Some of them, to be totally honest, are still in the ad hoc, not much process phase.
Yeah. I'm going to channel Pratik Singh, and ask a question about batch size, right? Because I think that factors into what you're talking about too. And did you have any focus with the work that you were doing, or maybe in collaboration with the product folks, on trying to get those features smaller for that exact reason, right? Because the bigger they are, the harder it is to pivot. So it's like, how did that factor in?
Yeah, and the harder it is to estimate the work as well.
Right.
So we found our sweet spot was epics that took 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
That seemed, if we tried to make it smaller than that, then there was more overhead, and it just wasn't real. We just needed a little bit more time on the engineering side. So I don't think we had many that were over that, mostly in that 4 to 6 week range. So yeah, figuring out your batch size, right, is a important piece. And I think that I think it's not a one size fits all.
Yeah, agreed. Totally agreed. So you do a lot of coaching now. You mentioned you're coaching inside of, other crypto engineers outside of the space. What's a thing that you usually try to get them started thinking about, even if it's not process specific, but how do you try to start their mindset thinking about some of these core principles that you've been walking through?
Good question. So a little bit too on the coaching that I do, I talk about that I do coaching in 2 realms, which are the internal and the external. So those of you who are listening, who are leading an organization, what I know from my own experience and the coaching that I've done, and I've been coaching people actually for a couple of years. It's just this last year that I decided to make the pivot into the full time. What I know is that if there's something that's going on in the team, in your people or processes or technology of your team, that is almost certainly reflected in some way of what's going on for you. So this really important aspect of, sure, let's definitely look at the team and see how we're going to implement change here. But while you're doing that, or even before you're doing that, look at the way you're acting in the system, right? How your behavior is influencing the system. It's much stronger than you might think.
Yeah, so, factor I think that gets left out a lot too, right? That
yeah,
your impact there. And I think we talk a lot about I don't know, misconceptions or myths about Kanban, Scrum, Agile in general. And I think Kanban kind of gets a bad rap for being maybe too data heavy, right? Or too process specific. And I love that you're pairing this up with coaching like that. That's thinking about what you're bringing in, the energy you're bringing to a team, because there's people are doing the work. Like at the end of the day, process is great. I love all the data, but
yeah,
people are doing the work. And so that's an important element of everything we're trying to bring together here.
Yeah. And you can also make positive change on the team. You don't have to go through a big, giant agile transformation to make change and improve what's happening on your team. And that also doesn't mean that you don't create a good vision that maybe, takes you all the way there, but how you achieve that vision can absolutely be done by steps, and one of the first things, one of the my clients, this was, I don't know, 3-4 months ago, maybe it was more than that. Anyway, there was just, his biggest problem was he had no idea what anybody was working on. So what we started with was, hey, engineers don't do work unless there's a ticket on the board. create one board, and now there's they weren't like breaking work down. They weren't like doing a feature and like planning the whole thing out. It was just, hey, I'm working on a task. I'm going to create a ticket and it's going to be on the board. You know, all situations are different. I'm not saying should be your first step. That's just an example of a first step that really they have continued to make progress. This company has continued to make progress in their processes, and that was the first step.
Yeah, I love it. How about from the blockchain perspective? You touched a little bit on this earlier of that being kind of the startup mentality here, but are there things that you see that are different with blockchain development that require different thinking or different process than even from Kanban?
Well, one of the things that's interesting about blockchain development, let's see, so the DevOps it can be a totally different world, particularly if you're in the blockchain development where, right, there's the core software in blockchain world, we call it a node. If you're running a network node, that's a server that's actually connected to other, well, let's just say we're talking about Ethereum, right? That's just a server that's running the core Ethereum code that's connected to all the other servers in the world that are running the code. So it's storing the blockchain locally, and then you query that server to be able to get information about the blockchain or to be able to broadcast a transaction or anything like that. And now on each one of the blockchains that you hear out there, each has their own node software, their own virtual server that you would need to run to be able to interact with that blockchain, right? So Bitcoin, Ethereum, Avalanche, Polkadot, Cosmos, they're all, and that technology and how we're running it and how you run multiples of them it was really challenging. At Shapeshift, if there was a problem with one of our systems, 90% of the time we had a problem with the network node, right? There was some issue with the network node connecting to the network node. It's syncing to the blockchain. So your DevOps processes, if you're going to be doing that level of blockchain work, are really critical towards availability, scalability, and maintainability.
Did you see DevOps adopting a similar process? Were they leveraging Kanban as well?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yes, absolutely. I think that was super important as we did things. Now, for those of you who are like thinking about blockchain technology and you're not there, or I want to also make sure you know that maybe it's been in the last couple of years or so, there's a lot of now basically blockchain nodes as a service. So you can, instead of having to run these nodes yourself and have to it can be quite a headache. Depending on the blockchain, there are different providers out there that you can then use and just connect to their API, get an API key, and you can do all the same things: query blockchain data, broadcast transactions, send crypto and receive crypto and all that stuff using third-party APIs. So that, want to say it's not quite as bad if you can do that, but that's also a question of if you can use those services or if you need to run your own.
Awesome. Well, we talked about predictability and we talked about effectiveness. How about efficiency? When I think about when you guys were at Shapeshift too, and you described how many times the market shifted there, right? And if a lot of how the wealth of that company is fluctuating that dramatically, did that have an impact on how you had to scale and change the number of people in the teams or even in the staff?
Yeah. Well, for sure did. One of the pieces that I left out when I was telling that story before about we were growing, had these disparate product teams that didn't know what each other were doing. And then we decided we needed to hunker down, focus. Before we started implementing processes and really bringing the teams together, the first thing we did was lay off 30% of all the employees. So certainly know what that is like. And that's not fun at all, but that's kind of necessary. And it did make it easier to bringing a team of 30 engineers together was better than bringing a team of 45 or 50 into the same processes. So, and then, right, as things went from there, it was just the typical fluctuations of people leaving and hiring and all that stuff. You just have to, everybody has to account for that, because that's absolutely going to happen.
Yeah. Did Kanban help? I tend to think of, like, especially for a lot of organizations right now, going through exactly what you just described, right? Budget cuts, layoffs. We are, the first thing ends up, how can we still do the same amount of work with less people, right? Or how can we stay afloat with less people? Did Kanban help for those?
Yeah, for sure. When we did those 30% layoffs, we didn't even have Kanban yet. That's when things were still just all over the place. But what Kanban did is it helped us get the team that was the remaining core team together and all focused together. And it was kind of, a piece of like, well, we're developing something new together too, right? To implement Kanban. Then once we were in that, we had that streamlined Kanban process going. When people would leave, it did make it easier, because we had these squads that were working, and they all knew what each other were doing, and there were tickets defined. And so it was never fun, but it did make it easier when someone left, that the rest of the squad could absorb the work. And yes, we did have to kind of go back to our estimations, right? We had promised something by this date and see if we had to adjust that, because now we had one less person.
Right. Yeah.
But at least it made it all more predictable.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I see some great questions queuing up here. I'd love to give you the first one, Steve. Is from Steve Tendon. It's the first one for you, Josh. Steve, welcome. We're happy to see you here. He's got a question. Will Kanban help with DAOs? And I think it might help if you can explain what DAOs are, decentralized autonomous organizations. How are they different? And then let's answer if Kanban can help.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. Okay, so DAOs, DAO, right? Decentralized Autonomous Organization. We say DAO. So my quick little spiel, just so everybody can level set on this, is the difference is that DAOs are there's no board of directors, there's no CEO, there's no executive team in a DAO. That's a truly decentralized DAO, right? Another thing you're going to find if you're doing any looking at DAOs is there are multiple organizations that are calling themselves DAOs. And I'm not going to tell anybody you're not a DAO, but where you fall in your level of decentralization and your level of autonomy varies pretty widely. So truly decentralized, the key is that in a company, you've got a bank account, right? The money is held in a bank account, and the CEO and the executive team submits a budget, the board approves it, and the CEO disperses the money, and it trickles down through a hierarchical organization, right? A truly decentralized organization, your treasury is held in a cryptocurrency address. And this is true for Shapeshift has done pretty well on the decentralized. The Shapeshift DAO is doing well on this decentralized scale. So funds are held in a cryptocurrency address. How is that money spent? Because it's not through this centralized budget process. Well, the way it goes is that anybody that holds the Fox token, which is the determined governance token for Shapeshift, can submit a proposal to spend money from the DAO. So, and then, for example, when Shapeshift DAO first started, I was the first one to submit a proposal to hire, there were 10 engineers who wanted to stay working for the DAO. So I submitted a proposal to pay me and 9 other engineers to continue the engineering effort on the Shapeshift product. And then there's a little governance process, which varies. But ultimately what happens is that all of the token holders, anyone who's holding the Fox token holder, can vote on whether they want to approve that money to be spent or not. So this is not going to a CEO for approval or your boss or your manager. You're going to the community of token holders. And Sometimes it gets voted down. In my case, the proposal was approved. And so the funds are then released to me to be able to spend as, people then, there is that trust. People then trust me to spend that amount of money to hire engineers for 3 months, right? To pay salaries for 3 months. So that's kind of like at a mechanical level, how a decentralized organization works. So now, right, we had engineering effort. How's a roadmap determined for a decentralized organization, right? That's super interesting. By the way, most of these questions, nobody has fully answered. They're still in process of being answered, how these DAOs are going to operate. There was still a product team, and there was also a product team in Shapeshift DAO. All of it got a lot smaller. And so engineering and product, we had meetings that were held in an open forum on a Discord server that anybody could join, right? There were no private meetings. It was all talking about the roadmap, what we're going to build, what's possible, what's feasible. And then we also took that to the community. We didn't do an official vote for the roadmap, but we did take it to a community call to get feedback to determine what was going to be built. And then every once in a while, some outside person would offer a bounty for a certain feature set. And we had our code was all open source. So we had outside contributors, submitting PRs to be able to add functionality, to be able to earn a bounty. It's all been really, really interesting. So, but the core engineering team, we use GitHub Issues is the Kanban board that we use. We don't do the level of estimating, the predictability, although the work we're doing is smaller chunked in smaller teams. So we're doing a little bit more of a gut check on when things will be done. We're not doing the math, that estimation, cycle time math stuff. But we do have work that's broken out that moves across a Kanban board. So there's visibility and tracking. That's what Shapeshift DAO did with Kanban.
Awesome.
Does that answer the question sufficiently, do you think?
Yeah. And it sounds, I'm hearing transparency and visibility in that, right? It sounds like a requirement for a DAO.
Absolutely. Even more so.
Okay. Sure. Steve's got another great question here. How does the immutability of smart contract code affect your deployment processes? And how did you model that on a Kanban board or system?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Shapeshift actually did not do much smart contract development ourselves. Shapeshift is a platform. You can go shapeshift.com where you can interact with multiple blockchains, invest in multiple DeFi protocols across multiple blockchains from one interface, which is really unique. Most of them only focus on one chain or another. So that's kind of Shapeshift's unique value. We have done some like ancillary smart contract code just to be able to qualify this question a little bit. But that immutability, right? For those who are not familiar, basically once a smart contract is deployed on the blockchain, you can't change it. It's like set. So the biggest thing that means for a lot of people is audits, security audits, like auditing the code. And there's a huge business out there. There's many smart contract audit firms, because this is like, oh man, I can't think of the word. The vulnerabilities in smart contract code have led to hundreds of millions of dollars being hacked and stolen out of various smart contracts. And that's the problem, is that because they're immutable, what then has to happen is you have to migrate to whole new smart contracts. And when there's funds involved and different things, it's a really challenging process. So the main thing that does the impact of dealing with immutable code once it's deployed is that the controls around the security and the audit before you deploy. And that could be tracked in a Kanban board. We mostly did a lot of work and then gave it to the auditors. They would come back with, here's what needs to change. And those just become new tickets on the Kanban board, before we move to the next step.
Yeah. Rather than having it sit in the board as a kind of a third party, like open and waiting on a third party.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, great. That's a good question. Steve's got another one. Crypto protocols are open source. How do you see Kanban support open source development?
Yeah. Well, it's a good, Steve's got a lot of good questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. These are great.
Steve knows what he's talking about. So yeah. And, Shapeshift also, I mentioned, had an open source. I have a couple clients who are building protocols that are open source. And so Kanban, I think, is in that visibility. So we have the core team, right? That can define pieces of work. And then you have outside contributors, and we would have like a ticket of work, and we would tag them in GitHub issues as to whether they were open, whether the core team decided that they would accept external PRs for a small feature set or a bug ticket or something like that. And and because it's GitHub issues, it's all out there in the world for everybody to see, as opened up to the world. So the Kanban board became the way that we collaborated with our external contributors. So it actually really supported the process very well.
Yeah, I think that ties to the next question that Steve posted too, of, a key value proposition of blockchains is to enable a process that spans across organizational and jurisdictional boundaries. The question was, do you see Kanban being employed to make cross organizational processes? And I think that's what you're describing right here with GitHub, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This was one organization and multiple individuals all collaborating together. So make it cross-organizational for sure. I definitely think that it helps.
Did you try any other tools before you landed on GitHub for that?
Well, the corporate company switched out of Jira to Colleen. You even recommended that. Can you remember their name? I can't remember.
It was probably Kanbanize.
Yes, Kanbanize. Which we really liked. They had some really sophisticated modeling tools. And then when we became a DAO, we looked to cut costs wherever we could. That was a big piece of it, because we couldn't pay bills with US dollars, right? With a credit card out of a bank account. Yeah. And GitHub issues was free and had made a lot of progress. And so the team also shrank. So the Shapeshift DAO went straight to GitHub issues.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've even seen it used in bigger organizations. I mean, like you said, there's some limitations, I think, with the data you can get out of the boards, but there's ways to visualize that. And I had one team that even put, we were trying to make work item age visible on the board, and there's nothing out of the box in GitHub that's going to do that on the board. So we just put the date that the ticket started in front of the description of the ticket, so that you could see that on the board really quickly. So I think there's ways to get some of the sexy features that you mentioned you can hack through it with a GitHub board too.
Yeah. That's a good hack. Yeah.
I don't see any new questions. If anybody else has any other questions, feel free to post them here. But I'd love to kick it back to you, Josh, just to talk a little bit about your recommendation for where teams can get started if this is something that they feel like might be valuable to them.
Yeah, for sure. There's all kinds of resources at ProKanban.org, obviously, right? If you're interested in talking to me at all about Kanban, crypto, or leadership coaching for engineers, you can find me at leadershipcoach.io. What I do is one-on-one coaching. I do offer various team trainings, and then also earlier in the year, I had a series of free workshops that I was doing about once a month. They are done for the year, but I'll likely pick those back up in January. And so that would be, if you go to leadershipcoach.io and then go up to the hamburger menu and go to the workshops site, that's where I would post things about that. So feel free to look there. Or sign up for my mailing list. At the bottom of the page at leadershipcoach.io is a MailChimp sign up, and I can keep you updated on all those offerings there. Also on that site are places, I got buttons all over the place to schedule a 30-minute intro call with me. And, I'm happy to really chat about almost anything. So if anything grabs your attention and you want to chat, please go there and grab 30 minutes on my Calendly.
Highly recommend it for anybody listening. I think you would learn a lot from 30 minutes with Josh. I know I always do, and enjoy chatting with you, Josh. Steve clarified his last question here, not so much around cross organization in the terms of like the open source question, but more about business processes. So like a supply chain management example here. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that question, Josh.
I think that I'm not sure about like how Kanban in there, for sure, right? The idea of blockchains being used to track supply chains. I mean, there's already companies doing this. I was talking to a guy who's at Walmart, has a whole little blockchain division. They're actually using an internal blockchain for supply chain tracking. So the challenge there is like, you got this internal blockchain. The beauty of blockchains is that they're a decentralized trust for multiple parties, to Steve's point, right? Multi-organizational. So I think that blockchains can do a lot for our supply chain processes and the transparency of where do the parts for the products that we're purchasing, where do they come from? Where's that food originally sourced from, right? I think there's a lot there. I'm not sure, like besides Kanban helping us develop the blockchain or the interactions with the blockchain or the contracts to be able to do that, I don't know if there's a place for Kanban once it's finally implemented and the process is live.
More like the maintenance side.
Yeah, it's more like the development maintenance of it, whereas the actual tracking of supply chain should all happen on the blockchain where it is immutable and decentralized.
Yeah, and that particular question too might be a little bit more when we're thinking supply chain, like end to end, right? So if we even apply the end to end business process thinking here of inside of the organization, right? You talked about almost the contracts between product and business or product and engineering. Maybe even if you start thinking through all the way down to marketing, you talked about conferences, right? So I think you could even think inside the organization, but maybe cross-function, right? Of how Kanban helps pull some of those different things together from a predictability and visibility standpoint too.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe Steve, maybe you're on, maybe you should develop a Kanban blockchain, like your Kanban board on the blockchain, like
cool.
Maybe something could be useful there.
Yeah. I love it. I think you're onto something here. Love our first Kanban for Everyone community project, led by Josh Foreman.
led by Steve Tendon, I think.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Josh, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your week and your holiday week here to come in and talk to us about this topic. This was a fun one. And we'd love to have you back anytime you want to talk more about Kanban and how it applies to areas outside of what we traditionally think or traditional software development paths here. So thank you so much for joining us. And we'll be sure to add your notes here around leadershipcoach.io in our show notes on YouTube as well. And please join us in the new year for a whole new round of Kanban for Everyone.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure. Really appreciate it. Have a good day.